Man, well, let me tell you, I can, I'm, I'm not gonna tell you what's in my Yeti cup that's under the table because, it's been one of those weeks, and I don't want, LinkedIn kinda kicking us off for talking about sort of, favorite drinks, but,
Yeah.
all is good. It's Friday, right before, for many, a long holiday weekend, so I'm feeling very, very blessed. How about you?
Same, same. I mean, so last time we met, I was letting everyone know, hey, I'm heading to Colombia. And I'm gonna tell you what, Colombia owes me nothing. I it owes me nothing. I might have a balance, but it owes me nothing.
I told you. I told you. Listen, you were gonna have a really hard time getting on that plane. I told you.
So it was awesome because one, I was with my friend who's Colombian, but hadn't been back, so like wanted to do all the stuff, right? And then her family, who are like just taking us everywhere. Like we went to Guatupe and learned of all of that stuff. Went and climbed the rock,
Check
the
you out.
675 steps. By around 500 steps, I was like, listen, I don't know the hamstrings, you know what I mean? But made it through, and went to Jardine. Like it was awesome, and partied in Provenza until like very late in the night. A lot of agua diente was drunk. It has no
Ooh,
sugar, no sugar. So that was our
okay.
mantra. So no hangover, but it was awesome. Had a really great time, and came back to reality, especially today in the last couple of days of just you know I guess disappointing things. So as a
Mm,
lawyer, by background, just some disappointing judgments by the Supreme Court. And one in particular, the affirmative action decision today. I'm not going to get into legal merits, but I would say this just generally. There's this movement. I think there's two movements, right? So one big movement trying to act as if systemic racism is a thing of the past, right?
right.
And then the other side is saying, no, it is not a thing of the past, but we're fighting and we're scratching and we're grinding every day to make it a thing of the past. And I think the
Mhm.
decision today was in the lens of systemic racism is a thing of the past, and by having like affirmative action, it just favors one side, and we can't have a fair society without it. And it's ridiculous because the evil that affirmative action was meant to combat has not been fully eradicated.
Right.
So,
It has not been dismantled, right, and being a product of affirmative action, I,
yeah,
had the benefit and was very fortunate to attend college, right,
yeah,
and so being a product of that and, coming from a household, a low-income household, and recognizing that sort of my talent and my value would be appreciated on a college campus, and that consideration around some of the things that I was me and many, many others were navigating around as considerations were being made, is definitely a game changer,
yeah.
and changed my life. So, affirming what you're saying in terms of the disappointment, that we're feeling. So I'm sure we and everyone else will continue to stay tuned, to see how that continues to come together.
Yeah, the
Um,
one thing I'd say, and I've heard this before, and it always buoys me. Is like when you hear all the stories, the negatives, the challenges that our mothers, our fathers, our grandfathers, our forefathers, all of our ancestors have gone through. What you've never heard after the statement of these challenges, these tragedies, these atrocities is,
mm,
and we gave up. Right? No, we kept going. We kept going after. We kept grinding. We kept moving forward. So, regardless, we're gonna keep going and moving forward.
we are going to keep going. And in that spirit of moving forward and keeping it 100 and having these career conversations, we're going to get into it in a minute. But you already know what time it is. So let's take it away. Hey, friends, welcome to Keeping It 100 Career Conversations. Now, you already know not all career conversations are created equal. If you're a flavorful professional looking to decode that workplace and accelerate your career roadmap, let's go ahead and let's get right into it with your hosts, Adriana Dawson and Collin Bailey. Hey, hey, hey,
Hey,
everyone. I
what's
know
going
it's a
on?
long holiday weekend. Hopefully, we've got some of you connected with us live, but remember, you've got this goodness that you can come back to and watch us on different platforms. So, again, welcome to Keeping It 100 Career Conversations with Adriana Dawson and Collin Bailey. So, folks, just a few housekeeping rules. For those of you who are able to join us, make sure you share this goodness with your network. Let them know that you're plugged in and that you're connected today so that they can also join the conversation. Um, Please feel free to jump into the chat if you have any questions or thoughts or just throughout the conversation, if anything is resonating with you, just make sure that you let us know what's on your mind. We want to hear all of that. And yeah, continue to build community, network, get to know each other. So we'd love to see some of that. But as far as today, right, and today's goodness, it's Colin, something that you and I have been talking about consistently as we've engaged in these, very, very real conversations about uh, the journey, the journey that we've all been on, and how we've had to make decisions or assessments about, our value and our worth, and what does that upward mobility look like. And so, our goal on this platform and via these conversations is to continue to introduce you to these amazing talent assets that
Yeah.
have very similar lived experiences, who have had their own unique paths to share that goodness and their stories with you. So today, folks, we have a very, very special guest with us. We have Tye Graham joining us today. So, hey, Tye, thank you so much for joining us. And Tye is Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer with Amalgamated Bank. And he leads the bank's human resource strategy. And he has a very, very distinguished human resource background. And he is prepared to share all of that and more with us
Mm-hmm.
today.
Yep.
So, Tye, thanks so much for joining us.
You know what? I am truly honored to be here. So thank you for inviting me as a guest, and just hope that there's something I can share that will be a benefit to those in attendance. So thank you very much.
No, definitely you do. And
No, it's our absolute pleasure. So, yeah, Colin, go ahead and take it away.
so, our goal is to really dig into your journey as a leader from, origin story to, whatever you feel is going to just bring that, as Adriana would say, that goodness to the audience. So, so I'd like to start at the beginning. And what was your first professional job?
Okay, yeah, that is the beginning. All right. So my first professional job was as a customer service representative, working in an area called the Loan Phone at a bank just outside of Boston called Bay Bank. My job was to take phone calls from applicants and to do data entry into a credit scoring model
Mm,
and to provide instant loan decisions. I think it was the first time that any company in the Northeast was actually leveraging credit scoring, which is very commonplace today. Everyone uses credit scoring in some capacity, but that was my first entry, and I remember my salary at the time was about $15,000, and it was really a great job. But I had two kids and a wife to support at that point in time. But it was a great entry into banking. Yeah.
So, how did you take that customer service piece and then transition into HR? I mean, I get some of the commonalities, but it's HR is different. So, what made you go that way and attract you, and how did you make it happen?
Now, I always knew that I wanted to be in HR. And I kept speaking it into existence to anyone who would listen. I would say I want to be in the HR division, and I got told no a lot of times
Mm,
by HR people who I know to this day, who some told me that I didn't have what it took to be in HR. But what I realized in that customer service job was that there was an opportunity to become an on-the-job trainer, and
mm.
no one wanted this job.
Mhm.
No one wanted the job. No one wanted to talk to other people. in that way. And so what I did was I took that job. It didn't come with much pay, but I took the job, and it gave me the opportunity to work with the actual training and development division, which was a part of human resources. And I would work with them on things that I didn't know at the time, like how to design and develop programs. But I learned what was called ROPES, which is outdated now, which is the process of designing programs, which was review, overview, presentation, exercises, and skills practices. So ROPES stood for that. And I made a lot of relationships in having to collaborate with them. And what was interesting was a job came open in the actual training and development division, an entry-level job, and paid a little bit less than I was making in a call center because I didn't get any incentives with that job. But I took it. And I got it because the people I'd interacted with were actually acting as my references because they knew that I understood the concepts. I could design and develop programs minimally. And I could also facilitate and provide instructions. So I got the job, and voila, I was in HR on the back end of HR, but I was still implanted in HR. So that was how I did it.
Now, can I jump
Please,
in here,
please.
Tye? Because I'm really curious because, I recognize that sort of historically HR is known to be more primarily dominated by women, right? And I wonder if at that time that was the case for you, and also how many other flavorful
Yeah,
professionals were part of your work team or you were
yeah.
seeing of color within that new work stream that you had recently transitioned
I
into.
have to say that at that time, I was the only person of color, to my recollection, in the HR, in the training and development division. And those who mentored me were not persons of color, but people with whom I'd established a relationship with. But for diversity, there wasn't a lot of diversity in HR then, but there were a lot of women, as you point out, who were managing the HR and the training functions at the time. But if we go later in my career, there are quite a few uh, people who I've interacted with who are people of color, who are male, who are female, who are in a number of very senior level roles. But I'll talk about them if you want me to, if and when you want me to. So I don't
Yeah.
ramble. So I don't
No,
ramble.
no, it's all good. And you know what? I just want to highlight a couple things that I think your
Yeah.
story really emphasizes. So one, you had a strategy. So we are strategic many times for the company, but we're not strategic
Mhm.
for ourselves. But you had a strategy of, hey, I'm going to take on this job
Mhm.
that a lot of people are running from because it's going to give me interactivity with the area that I want to get into. And then B, I talked about it last time about betting on yourself. Look, you said I'm going to take this job that's paying me a little bit less, but it's going to give me access to what I really want to do, what I want to be, what I'm passionate about, and obviously the rest is history. So strategy and betting on yourself, confidence, great point. So you talked about these companies. So what it would be awesome if you could let us know one thing that you took from each company that really contributed to building you out as a professional.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So let's see. Now we're talking about 35 years, so this might take a minute. So, okay. So I would just say, I think I've worked for a total of 9 companies, if I've got it correct, and each one been a phenomenal experience. And there's a lot I've taken away from each one of them. I would say Baybank, first of all, the company that I just referenced, where I was loan phone then in training. Um, I think what I learned there is to ask for what I want,
Mm,
um, and
Mm.
that I might get a no, but embedded in that no is the opportunity for me to ask, why didn't I get it? And then whatever that why is was my gap. And I filled that gap. And so I think that I took that away from Baybank, and that was an important, I think, first lesson because there are a lot of things I ask for now. Sometimes I get the answer no, but I do realize that I can ask the why, and then that's what I need to satisfy is that
Yeah. Can I interject there and just say it again from the back of the room?
Yeah.
I know, louder for the folks in the
Ask
back.
for what you want. Closed mouths don't get
Oh, you
fed.
have to. You have to. You have to. Now, I will tell you though, there's a lot of trepidation sometimes in asking for certain things. But what I did realize was I had never really seen anyone lose their job for asking for what they wanted. And so I realized that
Mm,
I wasn't going to get what I wanted unless I asked for it, because no one knew what I wanted unless I actually said it. And so that was revealing for me. And I didn't lose my job when I said I want to work in HR. In fact, I got a lot of support along the way by constantly talking about those things that I did indeed want. So yeah,
No, that's a great lesson for all of the
yeah,
professionals online. Listen, when you want something, speak it into existence, and you have to speak it to the power that can give you that opportunity.
yeah,
You have to be your best advocate, but definitely say what you need, say what you want. And if you're not going to get it from where you are, that's
yeah.
important data that you can then implement. So, what's that
I get
second
that.
lesson?
Second lesson, I would say I left Bay Bank and went to U.S. Trust Bank. Now I went to U.S. Trust Bank as an assistant vice president of training. But I will say this, if I go back to Bay Bank, I took the job that I got at Bay Bank in training. Well, it was an entry level job, and I actually got an AVP job at U.S. Trust Bank. And when I went to U.S. Trust said, hey, listen, we're going to hire a VP who you'll report to. And I said, great, but would you give me 6 months to prove to you that I can do that VP job? Just show me what it requires. They said, okay. They gave me 6
mm.
months. And I will say 6 months later, I was promoted to VP of corporate training and development. And I didn't know at the time, but we were about to do some 8 acquisitions, and we were merging companies into our company over a period of about 3 years.
Yeah.
And so what I learned there was how to do mergers and acquisitions on the integration from the integration perspective. But I also learned the value of collaboration, because that job forced me to collaborate with any and everybody who managed a
Right.
division who had people and processes and systems that were incoming. And so I would say my lesson from U.S. Trust was significantly around collaboration. Now, U.S. Trust then got purchased by Citizens Bank, and I did not go. In fact, at the time, I got laid off. And I will tell you that Citizens played an important part in my life, because later on I went back to Citizens, and it's a phenomenal company. But I didn't go at the time. I took a package and I was off for 6 months. And so I will tell you that the one thing that I'll call being laid off for 6 months an employer, because the one thing I learned there was
I
I learned
love
about the
that.
importance of family. My
Mm.
kids are in their 30s today, and they still talk about the time that we spent together when they now know dad didn't have a job. And they've now also put the dots together, because my ex-wife at the time would constantly talk about the fact that we wanted to own a home. And so my kids were on this scavenger hunt for a home. They found one. Dad didn't have a job, but I ended up buying a house while I was laid off, which was my motivation to then go find my next job. So let me just say.
Mm,
But what I learned during that time was the importance of just the balance with family. And my kids and I could not be closer, but I do think that our relationship started at that point in time. Um,
wow.
After that, I went to Fleet Bank, and going into Fleet Bank, I kind of asked for what I wanted. Um, but I met this wonderful leader. Her name is Janet Banks. And in fact, I noticed that Janet commented last night on LinkedIn. But Janet had a job open for a group director of learning and development. And I shared with Janet that I wanted that job, but I really wanted to transition into being an HR business partner. If you look
Mm.
at what I do today, it's nothing more than an HR business partner for the whole company. But I said to her, I want to be an HR business partner. So Janet said, I don't have an HR business partner job that I can offer you, but what I do have is this group director of learning and development. And you can do this job working for someone who is responsible for learning and development, but also is a business partner. And his background is in learning and development. His background is in HR, yours is in learning and development. So the two of you can cross-train each other. And I have to say that we cross-trained each other, and I feel very fortunate. He moved on to another job 6 months later, and then I suddenly found myself being promoted in the middle of what was a reorganization of the businesses at that point. Whereas Janet gave me the opportunity to be HR for HR, which means that I was the HR business partner for her boss, and then also HR for Fleet Bank in the state of Rhode Island. But I'll tell you, what I took away from that was a lot of folks were questioning why I got the job. And I was even questioning why I got the job. Let's just be clear. But I knew that I'd asked Janet for this job. But what I didn't realize is that Janet, she was a great manager. She watched me carefully based upon those things that I was responsible for prior to being promoted. And when I asked her why I was promoted into the job, she said, my leadership philosophy is that my job is to identify smart people, put them in tough situations, and believe in their ability to figure things out. And so she said, the answers that you need in order to figure this out, most of them are on the team of people that you're going to manage. And she was right. But at the same time, she said, my job as a leader is also to make sure you don't drown and that you know that I'm your lifeline. And then she ended by saying that you have to realize, though, that as your lifeline, you can call me, but don't call me too much. Because if you call me too much, then I'm going to question whether I put the right person in the job. That was all I needed. That was all I needed. But that was, I have to say, that sticks with me to this day.
Well, that and if I can
Please,
jump in here
please.
with the question, because as you've gotten to that point, in your career, and I know that you're going to kind of take us through the additional progression, but at that point in your career, how were you thinking about your value as you were having these conversations and making moves, right? So if we're going to keep it all the way
Please,
real,
please.
how were you starting to sort of calculate and identify how the numbers
Yeah.
should look based on the role that you were stepping into, the people leadership opportunity that you had? I think those are additional, nuggets that my girl,
Right.
hey Rock, what's going on, Rocky? So we've got, some folks joining in. Mike, thanks again for joining in. We've got Christine. But would love to hear
Yeah.
some of your strategies as you were assessing these new opportunities that you were
Right.
asking for and demonstrating your capability for. How did you start thinking about negotiating and talking about salary and comp and all the things you felt you were deserving of? Or were you there
So
yet?
let me just tell you, this is the unique part about my job. What you heard me describe is my job was HR for HR. So what that means is HR was my client. And it's somewhat like being a doctor for doctors, where there's probably no more difficult job. So in that job, I had access to pay data. And the pay data that I had access
Mm,
to was pay data for HR. So we had the McLaughlin surveys and the like. And so in making recommendations for pay increases as HR for HR, one of the difficult parts of the job was I had to make pay recommendations for myself to the HR leader of Fleet at the time. So in addition to making recommendations for everyone, I made recommendations for myself. Now that was interesting because in those discussions, I learned the value of being objective about my performance, being able to tie my performance to
mm,
those things that were of value to the company, HR's goals, et cetera. Because I will tell you, there were a few times, and I look back on it now, there were a few times where I made recommendations for pay increases for myself, and I realized I got told no. And when I got told no, I could then do the same thing I'd been doing, which is ask the why. And then embedded in the why was the gap. And so I've never had a problem asking for what I want, but based on some form of objective data, because it's hard to argue with data, hard to argue with data. But in some of the instances where I asked for increases, I look back on it now, I was much younger then. I realized I was asking for increases because some of the people I saw doing other jobs, now that I'm in HR, I knew what they were making. I thought I should be making what they were making. And I realized that it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. There's a lot of things that go into compensation. But yeah, that was a real learning journey for me at Fleet. I'm thankful for it.
No, that's something really important. So, you talk to folks, and it's not about talking to young professionals, all professionals who haven't like figured out the
Right,
objective business case
Right.
approach to comp.
right.
And I'm way better than him, and I heard that he's making this, right?
Oh
Now,
yeah.
I will never understand why people are talking to their peers who not really their friends and telling them
Yeah.
about their money, but they do it, right? And
Oh
so
yeah. Oh yeah.
regardless of what someone else is making, one of the big things that you just said, and I would just echo, is talk about you. You
Right.
shouldn't be if you're in a
Right.
conversation that's about you and your value and your worth, and you're talking about someone else, you're missing the boat,
You're
right?
in the boat. Right.
Here's what I did. Here's how I positively impacted the company, and
Yeah.
and this is what I would expect for what I do and what I will continue to do. You
Right.
know,
Right. No, that's fair. As long as it's objective, it's hard to argue with data. Provided you've got data, it's really difficult to argue with real factual data. Now, I will say that to keep going and not suck up any of the time that you may have planned for other discussions, I Bank Fleet got purchased by Bank of America. And when Fleet got purchased by Bank of America, I found myself actually working with a number of great people who, like myself, were from the South because Bank of America is based in Charlotte. And thinking about the one big thing that I took from Bank of America, there's so much. I have to say, I really got on a trajectory to be an HR business partner at Bank of America. But Bank of America invested in me to have me certified as a Six Sigma Green Belt, which at that time simply meant that I was responsible for a project that delivered a specific amount of either revenue or some savings, perhaps through finding a more efficient way to do something. But in that, Bank of America reintroduced me to something I'd learned in college, which was in stats, the whole concept of Y equals F of X. Now, I don't want to sound like a geek, but I'll tell you why this is important. But what it meant was your output is a function of your input. And so as a work product, it means that what you get out as a product is a function of the quality of what you put in to it. So the output is a function of the input. And then I'm standing in a room one day, and I think it might have been the HR leader said, you should apply the same concept to your career. And I thought, wow,
Mhm.
because what it means is you get out of your career, what you get out is a function of what you put in. So if you put
Right.
nothing into your career, then don't sit back and expect a lot out of your career. But if you put lots of quality items into your career, then you'll likely get what you want as the output. So the rewarding career that you desire, but it's all based upon not what somebody else puts into it, but based on what I'm putting into my career. And I have to tell you that to this day, and I am not a statistics wizard, I still remember Y equals F of X because it stayed right here in my head. I get out as much as well as I put in. But that's what I took from Bank of America. And I'll go more quickly, but I have to say I left Bank of America, went to Royal Bank of Scotland, Citizens Bank, and great experience because there I ran into the same HR leader who years before I did not get a job with the organization. And what she said is that she'd often reflected on that and wished that I could have made that transition with them. But what she taught me was she said this to us all, that we had to remember that the first word in our job title in human resources was the word human. And what that meant was that we need to
Mm.
treat people as HR, we need to treat people in the way that we would want to be treated. And if we're giving them products and services, we need to give them products and services of the caliber that we would expect. And then to also understand that as human beings, we all make mistakes,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And so not every mistake is something that's terminable. And I have to say, I still quote that to this day, but I took that from her. And I promise you all, there's only a couple more jobs that I've had. But I went to Sun Life Financial, and at Sun Life Financial, what I will say is that was the opportunity where I realized that the C-suite for me was within reach. It would take a few years to get it, but I realized it was in reach. But the reason I realized it was because I saw people who looked like me. The president was a black man. The chief HRO was a black man. And then the chief marketing officer was a black woman. And for the first time, I got a real chance to interact every single day with one or more of them. And what one kept telling me, and he still tells me that to this day because he's still in my life to this day, is that I could do this. He kept saying, you can do this. And I kept trying to identify what the gap was, because he's phenomenal. And I wanted to be half as phenomenal as he is. But I realized that there was a gap. And so what I proceeded to do was just try to address that gap in my next few opportunities. And the next one was at GE, where I have to say GE, what GE taught me was they introduced me to some of the leading edge practices in HR. A lot of what we all do, whether we know it or not, goes back to GE, perhaps GE in the 50s, GE in the 60s, GE in the 70s, and we've rebranded it somewhat. But at GE, I got introduced to that, but I also got introduced to two other minority leaders. One was Hispanic, the other was black, like me, and they were both CEOs of my business. One preceded the other. The big lesson I learned from both of them was that a lot of the things that I always thought were barriers to entry, no one was putting up that barrier other than me. And I'll give you a very silly example of what I mean by that. Augustine asked me to play golf. And when Augustine asked me to play golf, I thought, wow, this is the first time anyone's ever asked me to play golf in just this way, because normally folks have been going around me. I'd never been invited to play golf with anyone before. And so when Augustine asked me to play golf, he said, can you play golf? I said, no. And so then I said, I don't want to play. And then I realized that there were a number of people who had always heard me say, I can't play golf. They'd always heard me say, I can't play golf. So I never got asked to play golf. When Augustine asked me, I said, I don't want to play. So I said, I don't want to play because I don't belong to a country club. So Augustine says, you don't have to belong to a country club to play golf. I'm like, oh, okay. So then I said, well, I don't want to hold up whoever's behind me. He goes, you're not going to hold anybody up behind you. He goes, I'm going to play a game called Scramble. I said, I have no idea what that is. He says it's best ball. And so long story short, I played golf. I loved it. Augustine then taught me to play golf. And then I realized I'd actually never been excluded from playing golf by anybody, but I'd been excluded from playing golf because of actions. Because I told everybody I couldn't play golf. Nobody invited me then, but I kept thinking it was something else. And I'll say one more thing. If I give you a less silly example, I used to think that bank financials were complicated. And so I stayed away from everything that was financial. And then it took one leader to tell me that it's the basic profit equation, which is everything connects to either revenue or expenses and then or profit. But finance, because it's their job, they've got lots of labels that they're required to put on things, but it all falls in generally one or two of those buckets. But I realized, you know what? Self-imposed barrier to entry. There are a lot of meetings I could have attended that I could have learned stuff from, but I kept thinking it was too complicated. But
So
yeah, that's my lesson.
So So that's a great keeping it 100 moment, right? So let's just keep it real with each other, right?
Right.
So as we're growing up, and like for me, I don't play golf to this day, but I don't necessarily broadcast. I don't play golf, but I know I have that barrier erected as well, right? And there's a lot of us who erect barriers in many ways. Like they won't want to get a drink with me,
Right.
plus I'm gonna have to go to this bar and listen to this type of music that I
Right.
hate and this and that. And the reality is, you're just trying to have a good time.
Right.
And you're just trying to connect with someone on a human level so
That's
that you
it.
can deepen the relationship. And so like we cast these things, these perceptions on others because we know that we have a little fear that we don't identify. And so then we're limiting ourselves. I love that story because like you said, hey, if you were saying I play golf, someone would have asked you because they love golf and they just wanted another person to come out and ball with them. Yep.
I will tell you this, Augustine, and I'm thankful for him for this because the other thing he told me is nobody is good at golf. He said, unless you are earning a living doing it, no one's good at golf. I went out and I realized that I could make contact better than half the people who I thought I'd be holding up. So I say that now. I do want to say this, which is I get that there are real barriers to entry that other people put up as well. And what I realize is I got enough fighting those that I don't have to put barriers up against myself. And so if something that I haven't tried, I'm going to try it or I'm going to ask for it. And then the worst thing I'm going to get is a no. But I realize
and Tye, if you don't mind, because I want to take sort of a different spin and ask sort of a different question related to that story, because one of the reasons we started this conversation and the keeping it real is because we recognize that, many of us didn't have folks to help us decode the workplace. And your example, illustrates that perfectly, where no one had sort of decoded and shared, hey, listen, don't worry about the game itself. It's the strategy, it's what it represents and the access it will give you. So while your career allowed you to step into HR and continue to ascend within, that space, so you might have been closer to gleaning on the decoding strategies, right? But I'm curious how and when you started to pick up on the fact that there are these really important strategies, perhaps that you weren't aware of when you entered into the professional world of work. And clearly, when you stepped into the HR world, you might have had aha moments a lot sooner than some of us did because you were sort of in the work. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, again, strategies for our folks listening in, how they can continue to decode and how they can continue to be receptive and open to experiences and conversations that perhaps are outside of their comfort zone. And more importantly, how do you know what you don't know, right? So where do you go for that information and for folks to kind of share some of that wisdom that isn't even in their line of sight because they don't even know if it's a thing.
No, I got you. And you know what? I'll skip the last two. We can come back to them if you want. But what I will say is that I began to decode when I found a trusted confidant mentor who looked like me. I'm just saying that's me. I'm not saying that works for everybody else. But what I realized is that Augustine, if I pick one, he helped me decode golf. And then there are other executives who, as I laid out a roadmap of those things that I wanted to accomplish, I trusted them because there was never an agenda. It was simply, Tye, you can do this. As I said, my leader at Sun Life would constantly tell me that I could do things. But those same people, if I wanted to do something that was the dumbest idea they'd ever heard, they would tell me, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. What makes you think that's a good idea? Talk me through it, whatever. But at the end of the day, they still cared about me. And at the end of the day, they gave me their objective input. Now, I will say they never told me not to do it, but they told me genuinely what they thought about it. Now, I have to say that the leader who worked at GE, kind of said it best one day that we were talking to a number of students who were, the job was in Arizona, but they were from the Phoenix community. And I remember what he said is that the higher up you go, the more people are susceptible to just telling you what you want to hear. And that what he
Mm,
realized was that he needed to surround himself with about 3 people who would always tell him the truth about himself. And he pointed out and said, now he is also African American, but he pointed to me and he said that his comment was, because it shocked me that he said it, he says, I am pleased by the fact that Tye is Black. He said, but that is not the reason that Tye works for me. It is not because he is Black. It's because he's skilled to do his job. And because he's
mhm.
one of a few people who will tell me the truth about myself. And I realized that if that was his approach, then that approach would probably work for me as well, in that I needed to make sure that I'm getting input from the right people. And I would say that to those who are on, and this is simply what worked for me, which is finding the right mentors and coaches and individuals that I could trust, who had some lived experience that might be similar to my own.
Yeah.
That was what I needed most.
And there's two things I'd pile on with is one, I think vulnerability exists when you have a mentor or a mentee relationship, right? And so being vulnerable enough to hear when your idea is stupid,
Right.
but taking it as constructive criticism, right? So I remember playing sports and coming up, and when the coach was on you, the people who succeeded were the ones who took and filtered out the noise of the yelling and the spittle, and heard the real beneficial coaching that came out of that. And the ones who didn't were the ones who just got really sensitive about that feedback, right? And I think the other thing is, we talked about how can a mentee bring value to a mentor or a sponsor. How do you bring value
Mhm.
to your sponsor? Well, you just said it. I'm going to tell you the truth, because I have sponsorship relationships
Right.
where I love that person. That person's family now, because they've done so much for me, and by virtue of that, my family. And if they say, "Hey, what do you think about this idea?" and I don't think it makes no sense, I'm gonna tell them that. But other
Right.
folks might be scared to death of them because of their professional persona. So that's a great way to bring value to someone who's investing in you. But you got to be open and willing to take that criticism.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. I agree with that.
Right. And we've got a question that's popped up from our
Okay.
girl, Raquel. And so Raquel is interested in finding out if you had any concerns with your transition in regards to your
Okay.
promotions.
Yep.
Did your sort of limiting beliefs, keep you up at night? Or did you have, concerns? So after the ask and you got the yes and you were stepping into your promotions, did you have a moment and you were like, oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
what happens now?
Yeah.
What do I do now? So, perhaps you can share with us if
No,
you
that's
had
good.
any concerns or you had any barriers and what that might have looked like and how you overcame
Yeah,
them.
yeah. Every single time is the answer to that. Every single time I've made a move, including this most recent move, I've had concerns with transitioning. I'll give you a funny story, but I'll just say this one first, which is I've moved to a number of different states with a number of jobs. I've lived in
Mm.
Boston, Arizona. I've had to work in Florida. I've lived in Philadelphia, and so forth. And each time I had concerns about transitioning to new communities. And now I'm in New York, new communities,
Mm,
and then working in new organizations where the cultures were different. The culture in New York was a little bit different than it was in Boston. But I love it now. I mean, I'm thriving, but I was so nervous. But I realized that I can plan for most things, because most things you get through by establishing relationships with people. And so if we go through any transition plan I've ever had, I mean, yeah, there's learning, products and systems, but the thing that makes all of that possible is people. And so it's trying to figure out what are the key relationships that I need to establish. But I will tell you, I did have a lot of fear when the first big transition was the job that Janet Banks put me in Fleet as the HR director in Rhode Island. And I will say, right after getting Janet's speech, the very first day on the job, there were about 300 employees who were in a building down the street who self-evacuated the building because there was construction going on in the building and they saw a white powder. And at that time, there was a lot of anthrax scares, but they
Oh.
self-evacuated the building. And I'll never forget, someone asked me, Tye, what do we do? 300 people just left the building. And Janet's words just rang out for me. And what the first thing I said was, are all the people out of the building? Because if all of them are not out, let's make sure that we can figure out how to get the rest of them out of the
Mhm.
building, or make sure that they're aware that others have left. And then from that, what I realized was my HR people have the answers. We can all figure this thing out together. But there are instances where you don't know. But what I will say, I think it's Rocky, is that anyone moving into any new job does not have all of the answers right away. But what anyone moving into any new job can do is plan. We have fancy names for them like onboarding plans, etc. But if you dig down to an onboarding plan, all it is people, processes, and systems. Things that we can think through on our own if someone is not sitting with us to think through them with us. And I hope that answers your question, Rocky.
No, definitely. So, one of the things I definitely was interested in understanding is when you think about your leadership brand, right? Because at some point, you move to different companies, you can move in different roles, but there's a brand that you bring, that that bat signal that people respond to say, that's who I need for this opportunity. What would you say that is, and has that evolved as you've gone through your career?
Yeah, I have to say one thing that I've learned, and the only thing I'm doing is just borrowing it from every other leader that I've been fortunate enough to work for, is I make sure that I deflect credit to the people who are on my team.
Mm.
Because what I realize is everybody knows that I'm the guy sitting here leading the work. So why am I going to say, here's what I've done?
Hmm.
This is just me, but it's my team. And at the end of the day, my team gets visibility. Now, I will say that we
Right.
go through processes that we call talent reviews, for example, here, where we're talking about performance, we're talking about potential, but we're also talking about exposure for people. Now, granted, I love exposure, but I don't need any more exposure right now. I can figure that out on my own, but it's my that I've got to make
Mm.
sure that I'm giving them exposure to. And I think that I would be described as a leader as one who gives opportunity, but also is willing to give credit.
Hmm.
But I realize that in giving opportunity to individuals, that what it's doing is it's developing them. We all laugh about delegation, for example, but a job as of a leader is to accomplish work through others, largely. You're accomplishing work through others. There's not a whole lot that most leaders are actually putting their hands on each and every day for 8 hours a day. So you're accomplishing things through others. So you have to think about who you're giving certain assignments
Mm.
to, not because you just need to get work done, but because you have to connect the work to perhaps that person's development interest, or the areas where you're pursuing with them, where they'll grow. So I think I'd be described as a leader in that way by those who either work with me now or have worked with me previously. Yeah.
I love, and I'm sorry, I just need to interject for a second because speaking of giving credit where credit is due, I got to give a shout out to my sister friend and BFF, Ivelisse Gonzalez,
Me too.
because if it weren't for Eve Gonzalez, number one, Ty, you and I would never have connected. And I know that she is one of the individuals that you have
Oh
also
my goodness.
impacted, and you shared those credits with her as she at one point was a part of your team, for one of your former employers, but she was kind enough to share the access to you and said to me months ago, Adriana, you need to meet this leader. You know, it's really important for you to connect with him. And so,
Well,
again, just underscoring what you've shared with us, Ty, in terms of, you know, giving credit and sharing in that goodness. And I wanted to extend publicly my thanks to our
oh,
girl,
definitely,
Ibelisa
definitely,
Gonzalez, for that
definitely. I have to
connection.
say this, and I'll make it quick. Uh, Eve actually hired me on behalf of Eastern Bank. She did. She did. This is the truth. Eve Eastern was looking for a senior vice president of talent management, and Eve reached out to interview me, and then she was asking me all of these deep questions, and so I kept wondering, how
That's
do
Eve.
you
That's my girl.
these deep questions? Yes, it was her questions, but it was also Eve had solicited questions from the people I would manage. And so she
Mm.
a spokesperson asking me these in-depth questions. And I have to tell you, I am so thankful for her because from that moment, she's been very instrumental to my life. So, and that's been 7 years ago. So I
That's
agree.
good. That's what's up. Yeah. So selfishly for the people on the line, I'd love for you to give us kind of, and it could be one, two, three, whatever, in a lightning round of things you
Hmm.
could think of. What are some of because one of the big topics here is how do you like know your value, and value in regards to
Hmm.
negotiating with your company about
Right.
opportunities, compensation, etc. What are some of the common mistakes you've seen folks make that really just cut the legs out of their value realization or their ability to convey to the power, the company, the boss, the management, that
Right.
they are the one that should be invested in with this promotion, this higher salary, whatever it may be?
Yeah, I will say this, and I won't attribute the name of the company to this one, but it's a good lesson. But one of the leaders at one of the companies I work for uh, said to me that I needed to be able to express my accomplishments and my job in terms of those things that were important to the company. And so when I asked him what those were, he said revenue, expenses, and profit. And so at the end of the day, he said, you can do things that are good, and you should do things that are good. But at the end of the day, the
Hmm.
bulk of what you do, when people tell me about your accomplishments, they need to describe it in terms of revenue, expenses, profit.
Hmm.
And so, what I will say is, in thinking about our value, it gets back to being objective, which is to kind of think about what you do in terms of what your company's mission, your company's goals are, because the more that you can align your accomplishments to those accomplishments that are important to the company
Hmm.
or those drivers that are important to the company, if your company's focus is on profit, and I realize that not all companies are for profit, um, then I think it helps you be able to articulate your value. I mean, because it ends up showing up in your performance review when you talk about the things that you've done, you're tying your accomplishments back to whatever
Hmm.
those drivers are for your particular firm.
And we're underscoring articulate. We're making sure that you are communicating that value back
Absolutely.
to the circles of influence, right? So
Absolutely.
just underscoring the importance of that.
Absolutely. Even the elevator speech, because same company, same person told me, think about your elevator pitch, which is when someone
Mhm.
asks you what you do, what do you say? Because it needs to be concise and it needs to hit a few punchlines. And I have to say that you have opportunities to randomly sometimes interact with leaders and to introduce yourself. And so I would say make sure that you're prepared in your mind to take full advantage of that by being able to introduce yourself. I am,
Mm.
and then where you work and quickly what you do. I guarantee you that will leave an impact on them.
Yeah, and I will tell you, there's times when you talk to folks and you're telling them, you think, hey, I'm the man, I've done all this stuff, but they don't know that's you.
Right.
Right.
And sometimes we assume, well, I have a great manager and they definitely are talking about what we're doing. But listen, and it's not even making them bad. They may not be saying
You're
your
right.
specific name. They're
You're right.
saying we accomplish these things, but not your specific name.
You're right. Which is why I say I have worked in other lifetimes for people who took my credit, and I know how it made me feel, and I refuse to do that to anyone else. Because at the end of the day, I'm not competing against my employees. It's my job to promote them. And my current team will tell you that I constantly say to them that my job is to prepare them to either replace me or to maybe leave me at some point when they outgrow me. But either way, that's
Love that.
okay. Because I've left a lot of companies and I've got great relationships still with them because I left to go do other things that may not have been available there. Now, granted, I don't want anybody on my team to leave, but I realize at some point that might happen, you know? So
Hmm.
Yeah, I want a multiverse of leaders that I helped create and helped
Mm.
support out there so that I can just look around and no matter where I look at my LinkedIn feed, there's someone I'm like, oh, that
right.
I know that person, right? You know what I mean? I can get tickets to that game, right?
Yep.
No, so
Uh,
maybe I can just jump in real quickly. In the maybe the minute or two we have left, Ty,
yeah.
if we do sort of a quick lightning thing,
Uh-oh.
could you leave or would you mind leaving this group with, like maybe a quick top 3 or 4 things that folks should start thinking about doing? Is it
Yeah.
refreshing their resume? Is it refreshing their LinkedIn? What catches your eye? You're on that end. You're informing your team. These are the things we're going to be looking for as we're looking at new hires or promotions. So, what kind of advice would you give our audience that they need to start thinking about doing now?
Well, I would say that the first thing is to have a career development plan. And what I mean by that is a plan that you own. Uh, don't expect anyone else to own it for you because I hear all the time my
Mm,
manager doesn't have a career development plan for me. Your manager doesn't know what you want to do unless you tell your manager. So your career development plan looks something like this in a lightning round, which is what is it that you want to do? Part one. What is it that you need in order to achieve that? Part two. And then you being true to yourself and say, when I look at the things that I need, how do I self assess myself against those things? Do I have some of them? To what degree? Do I have none of them? And then be true to yourself. Whatever the answer is for those things that you need more of, when you do your self assessment, you rate yourself as, let's just say, medium or low, then that becomes the items that are your gap, as I've been calling it. And then if you want to have a conversation with your manager, you're telling your manager, hey, listen, here's what I want to accomplish, here's what I need. And then here is how I self assess myself. So let's think about how you might be able to help
mm,
me. That's the conversation. And there are various ways that uh, companies can help you. One way is most of us don't think about it, which is in order to get tuition reimbursement for most companies, the only thing you really need to do is come to work and be a great employee in good standing. And then a number of folks may need to complete their degrees if that's one of the missing elements. Then there are things that you can leverage inside the company to do that. But your manager or human resources can oftentimes help you figure out how best to fill in that gap. That's the first thing I'll say. Second thing I'll say in the lightning round is going back to my y equals f of x. You're going to get out of your career really a whole lot of goodness if you put a whole lot of effort into it. Now, it may not be tomorrow, but what I will say is there were days where I really thought that I would never achieve being a vice president, senior vice president, or executive vice president. But I realize now, and sometimes I sit back and frankly, I just have to say I want to cry because I realized that some of the work that happened back then got me here. And then I realized this can't be it for me because now I want to do more. And so I have to keep putting more into myself. So
mm.
don't stop. Don't stop. And the fact that you're here means that you're putting a lot into yourself as well. So that's a great step.
Absolutely. And we love our folks. We so appreciate them for tuning in, for each one of our episodes at Keeping It 100 Career Conversations. And Ty, Colin, and I can't thank you enough for
Thank you
being so
both.
generous with your time and
Blessings.
your wisdom,
Thank you.
and sharing, your path with us. So again, on behalf of Collin and myself, thank you for joining us for another episode of Keeping It 100. Stay safe out there during the long holiday weekend.
Yeah, yeah.
Sip on something that you might like, put something in that Yeti, and we will see you soon. Stay close and stay tuned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Tye.
Take care.
Blessings.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining, friends. And don't forget to like, share, and hit that notification. See you next time on Keeping It 100.